"No one will marry ugly girls, sir, but I can cook," she said, and the lonely cowboy's reply changed her life. Eliza had lived in the small rural town her entire life. The town was quiet, with long dusty roads, wooden houses, and wide fields that stretched farther than the eye could see. People there knew one another very well. They knew each other's birthdays, family stories, and even small secrets. In a place like that, it was hard to hide anything, especially the way people looked at you. From a young age, Eliza understood that she was not the kind of girl people called beautiful. When she walked through the market with other girls her age, she noticed how shopkeepers smiled brightly at them but only nodded politely at her. When families gathered for weddings or festivals, aunties would gently praise other girls for their lovely faces and soft features. When it came to Eliza, they would simply say, "She is a good girl." The sentence always ended there, and she knew what that silence meant. She did not blame anyone. She had looked at herself in the mirror many times. Her face was plain, her skin uneven from long hours under the sun, and her hands were rough from work. She did not have the kind of appearance that made heads turn. Over time, she stopped expecting compliments. Instead, she focused on something she could control. Eliza lived with her aunt, who owned a small roadside cafe at the edge of town. The cafe was not fancy. It had wooden tables that had been repaired many times, simple chairs, and windows that opened toward the dusty road. Travelers, farmers, and truck drivers often stopped there for warm food and tea. The cafe smelled of fresh bread, herbs, and slow-cooked meals from early morning until night. Eliza began helping her aunt when she was very young. At first, she only washed vegetables and cleaned tables, but she watched carefully. She learned how to measure spices without using a spoon. She learned how to knead dough until it became soft and smooth. She learned how to cook stew slowly so that every bite carried deep flavor. Cooking became her world. While other girls spent hours choosing dresses or practicing hairstyles, Eliza spent her time learning recipes. She believed that food could speak in ways words sometimes could not. A warm bowl of soup could comfort someone after a long day. Fresh bread could make a tired traveler smile. A sweet pie could bring back childhood memories. Her aunt often said, "Child, your hands have magic," and for a moment those words would make Eliza forget everything else. But outside the cafe, reality remained the same. Suitors came to town every year, especially during harvest season when celebrations were common. Young men would visit families carrying small gifts and hopeful smiles. Eliza watched from the cafe window as other girls received flowers and kind attention. She told herself she did not care, yet something inside her felt heavy. Once, during a festival, a distant relative spoke carelessly within her hearing. "It will be difficult to find a husband for her," the woman said softly, thinking Eliza was too far away to hear. She should be thankful she can cook well. She continued serving tea with steady hands, but her heart felt fragile. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if her life would always remain the same. Would she always stand in the kitchen while others built families of their own? Still, every morning she woke before sunrise. She tied her hair back, washed her face, and stepped into the kitchen with quiet determination. She chopped onions as golden light entered through the window. She stirred pots while birds sang outside. The rhythm of work gave her peace. People began to talk about the cafe in a different way. Why, travelers would say, "There is a young woman there who cooks the best stew in the county." Farmers planned their market days around her fresh bread. Even children begged their parents to stop by for her sweet cakes. Yet no one spoke about her as someone to be loved. She was appreciated, respected, but never admired in the way she secretly wished to be. Eliza learned to hide her feelings behind gentle smiles. She treated every customer kindly. She listened to their stories. She remembered their favorite dishes. If someone looked tired, she added extra gravy. If someone looked sad, she placed a small dessert on their plate without charging for it. Her kindness became as well known as her cooking. But when the cafe closed at night and the chairs were placed upside down on the tables, silence returned. In that quiet space, she sometimes allowed herself to feel the truth she never spoke aloud. She was afraid of being alone forever. "Marriage is not the only path to happiness," she said kindly. "A strong woman can build her own life." She did not dream of grand romance or fancy dresses. She only wished for someone who would sit across from her at dinner, someone who would look at her face without disappointment. One afternoon, a group of young women entered the cafe, laughing loudly. They were dressed in bright colors and carried excitement with them. Eliza served them tea and warm pastries. As she turned to leave, she overheard one of them whisper, "She works so hard. It's a shame." Eliza did not ask what was a shame. She already knew. Instead of letting bitterness grow, she poured her energy into improving her skills. She experimented with new recipes. She tried different herbs. She woke even earlier to practice baking before the cafe opened. Each successful dish gave her a small sense of pride. The cafe slowly became more popular. Travelers recommended it to others. Some even said the food felt like home. Eliza found comfort in that thought. If she could not be someone's first choice in love, at least she could be someone's comfort in hunger. Yet even with all her strength, she remained human. Sometimes she stood in front of the mirror and studied her reflection. She would tilt her head slightly, wondering if there was something she could change, but after a moment she would sigh and turn away. She had accepted her place in the world, or at least she thought she had. What she did not know was that life has a quiet way of changing direction. Sometimes, when a person stops expecting anything, something unexpected begins to move toward them. For now, though, Eliza continued living as she always had, rising before the sun, cooking with steady hands, smiling gently at customers, and carrying a silent hope in her heart. She believed she would always remain the girl people described as good, but never beautiful. But she had no idea that very soon someone would walk through that wooden door who would see her in a way no one ever had before. Beyond the last row of houses in town, past the old water tower and the narrow wooden bridge, there were wide-open fields that seemed to stretch forever. At the far edge of those fields stood a small ranch with a faded red barn and a white house that had seen many seasons. That ranch belonged to Thomas Hale. People in town knew his name, but they did not know much about him. He was not the kind of man who stayed long enough to share stories. He came into town only when he needed supplies, flour, tools, animal feed, and sometimes coffee. He would nod politely at shopkeepers, pay for what he needed, and leave without unnecessary conversation. Thomas had once been different. Years ago, when he was younger, he had laughed more easily. He had plans, dreams, and someone by his side. But life had changed in ways he never expected. A promise had been broken by circumstances he could not control, and since then, he carried a quiet sadness that never fully left him. After that turning point, he poured all his energy into his ranch. He woke before sunrise, just like Eliza did, but instead of lighting a stove, he stepped into the cold morning air. He checked on his cattle, repaired fences, and rode across the fields on his old brown horse. The land was honest work. It demanded strength, patience, and responsibility. Thomas respected that. Yet when evening came and the sky turned orange and pink, he returned to an empty house. He cooked simple meals for himself. Nothing special, just enough to fill his stomach. He ate alone at a wooden table near the window. The silence inside that house was heavier than the long day he had just finished. Sometimes he would sit on the porch after dinner looking at the stars. He told himself he preferred the quiet life. He convinced himself that peace was better than disappointment. Still, there were nights when he felt the weight of loneliness pressing against his chest. The town often misunderstood him. Some believed he was too serious. Others thought he was proud. A few said he simply did not need anyone. The truth was much simpler. He had once opened his heart, and when things fell apart, he had chosen not to risk that pain again. One afternoon, after a long week of repairing broken fences and moving cattle to a new pasture, Thomas decided to stop in town before heading home. The sun was high and dust clung to his boots. He felt tired in a way that sleep alone could not fix. As he rode down the main road, he noticed the small roadside cafe he usually passed without thinking. He had stopped there only once before, years ago. It was not that he disliked it. He simply had no reason to sit somewhere longer than necessary. But that day something made him pause. Perhaps it was the smell drifting through the open window, fresh bread mixed with herbs and something warm and comforting. Or perhaps it was the simple desire to sit somewhere that did not remind him of empty rooms. He tied his horse outside and stepped inside the cafe. The bell above the door rang softly. The place was modest but clean. Sunlight fell across wooden tables, and the air felt welcoming. A few farmers were finishing their meals. A traveler near the window was sipping tea with a relaxed expression. Behind the counter stood Eliza. Thomas did not notice her appearance first. What caught his attention was the way she moved. Steady, focused, careful. She carried a bowl to a customer with both hands, making sure nothing spilled. She listened closely as someone spoke, nodding gently. When she approached his table, she did not stare at him like some people did when they saw a quiet rancher. She simply asked, in a calm voice, "What would you like to eat?" Her tone carried no judgment, no curiosity, only simple kindness. Thomas ordered stew and bread, not expecting much. He removed his hat and placed it beside him, then waited quietly. When the food arrived, the smell alone surprised him. Steam rose gently from the bowl. The bread looked fresh, its crust golden and crisp. He took a slow bite. The flavor was rich but not heavy. The vegetables were soft but not overcooked. The spices blended perfectly. It was the kind of meal that made a person pause without realizing it. Thomas had eaten in many places during his life, but this felt different. It was not fancy or decorated. It was honest food, prepared with care. Eliza noticed he ate slowly. She wondered if something was wrong with the dish. She almost asked, but he finished every bite and quietly said, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, yet the way he said them carried sincerity. For reasons he did not fully understand, Thomas returned the next week. Then again the week after that. Each time he told himself it was just convenient. The cafe was on the way. The food was good. There was no deeper reason. But slowly he began to notice small details. He noticed how Eliza wiped each table carefully, even if it looked clean already. He noticed how she gave extra bread to an older farmer without charging him. He noticed how she smiled at children who came in with dusty shoes and wide eyes. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply did her work with quiet dedication. One afternoon, heavy rain began to fall while Thomas was inside the cafe. The roads quickly turned muddy. He realized he would have to wait before riding back to the ranch. He sat by the window watching raindrops hit the glass. Eliza brought him tea without being asked. "It's cold today," she said softly. That was the first time they exchanged more than a few words. He nodded. "Storm came faster than I expected. It usually does." There was no awkwardness in the silence that followed. It felt natural, almost comfortable. For Thomas, that feeling was rare. As the rain continued, a few other customers left in a hurry. Soon only Thomas remained. Eliza's aunt was busy in the kitchen, leaving the front room unusually quiet. Thomas looked around and realized something surprising. He did not feel the usual rush to leave. The cafe did not feel empty. It felt warm. For a man who had grown used to silence, this simple space began to feel like a small refuge. He did not yet understand why he kept coming back. He would not have admitted even to himself that he was starting to look forward to those visits. And Eliza, though she tried not to think too much about it, began to notice that the lonely cowboy's visits were becoming a regular part of her week. Neither of them knew that these small, ordinary afternoons were slowly building something neither had planned. For now, it was just a tired rancher and a hard-working young woman in a quiet cafe at the edge of town. But sometimes the most life-changing moments begin in the simplest places. By the time autumn arrived, Thomas's visits to the cafe were no longer a surprise. Every few days, usually in the late afternoon, the sound of a horse stopping outside and boots stepping onto the wooden porch made Eliza glance toward the door without even thinking. She told herself it was only because he was a regular customer. Nothing more. The town began to notice, too. Farmers would smile quietly when he walked in. A few older women exchanged knowing looks, though no one said anything directly. Thomas, as always, paid no attention to gossip. He came in, removed his hat, and sat at the same table near the window. Their conversations were still simple at first. He would ask about the day's special. She would tell him about a new recipe she was trying. Sometimes he spoke about the weather or the condition of the fields. Other times he remained quiet, and she respected that silence. But slowly something changed. One evening the cafe was nearly empty. The sky outside was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. Eliza had just placed a fresh loaf of bread on Thomas's table when he said, "You work very hard." Most people praised the food, not her effort. "It's nothing special," she replied quickly. "It's just what I know how to do." Thomas looked at her for a moment, as if considering something deeper. "Not everyone does what they know with care," he said. She felt warmth rise to her face and quickly turned back toward the counter. Compliments about her cooking were common, but something about his tone felt different. It was steady and sincere. Over the next few weeks, their conversations grew a little longer. Thomas spoke about his ranch, about a calf that had been born too early but survived, about a fence he had rebuilt after a storm, about the way the fields looked at sunrise. He did not tell these stories dramatically. He simply shared them as if he trusted her to listen. And Eliza did listen. She asked gentle questions. She remembered details. When he mentioned that his horse had been limping slightly, she asked about it the next week. That small act surprised him. Most people did not remember small things about him. In return, Thomas began noticing more about her. He saw how she stayed late to prepare dough for the next morning. He saw how she counted coins carefully at closing time, making sure every number was correct. He noticed the faint tiredness in her eyes that she tried to hide behind polite smiles. One particularly quiet evening after the last customer had left, Thomas remained seated while Eliza wiped down tables. The sky outside was turning dark, and the cafe felt peaceful. "You should rest," he said suddenly. She paused. "There's still work to finish." "There's always work to finish," he replied calmly. She gave a small smile, but continued cleaning. A part of her appreciated that he noticed her effort. Another part of her felt nervous. Isn't not used to someone paying attention to her as a person rather than just as the cook. As weeks passed, Eliza found herself thinking about their conversations even after he left. She replayed small moments in her mind, how he listened carefully, how he never interrupted, how his eyes softened when he spoke about simple things like rain after a long dry spell. She tried to stop herself from hoping. Hope, she had learned, could be dangerous. One afternoon, a group of young men entered the cafe. They were loud and playful, teasing one another as they ordered food. When Eliza brought their plates, one of them made a careless joke about how she was lucky to be skilled in the kitchen since she would need it someday. The others laughed. Eliza felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice calm. "Your meal," she said simply, placing the dishes down. Thomas was sitting at his usual table. He had heard the comment. He did not react loudly or angrily, but his expression changed. His jaw tightened slightly, and his eyes grew serious. After the group left, the cafe returned to silence. Eliza tried to continue working as if nothing had happened, but the words echoed in her mind. Thomas stood up and walked toward the counter. He did not speak immediately. He waited until she looked up. "People speak without thinking," he said quietly. She gave a small shrug, pretending it did not matter. "It's fine. I'm used to it." That sentence, more than anything else, unsettled him. Used to it. Used to being reduced to one skill. Used to being overlooked. Used to careless words. That evening, after closing time, Thomas remained outside on the wooden bench near the door. The sun was setting slowly, casting long shadows across the road. Eliza stepped outside to bring in a basket she had forgotten. She saw him sitting there, staring at the horizon. For a moment she considered going back inside, but something inside her felt tired. Tired of silence. Tired of pretending she did not care. She walked toward him slowly. "Long day?" she asked softly. "They usually are," he replied. There was a pause. The air felt different, heavier than usual. Eliza's hands trembled slightly, though she kept them clasped together. Before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "No one will marry an ugly girl, sir, but I can cook." The sentence hung in the air like a fragile thread. She had not planned to say it. It was something she had carried inside for years, something shaped by whispers and quiet judgments. She did not say it with anger. She said it as if she were stating a simple fact. For a second, Thomas did not move. He turned his head slowly and looked at her fully. There was no laughter in his eyes, no pity either, only surprise, and something else, something firm. "Who told you that?" he asked. She let out a soft breath. "No one needs to say it directly, I can see it." She expected him to nod politely or change the subject. Instead, he stood up. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, his voice carried weight. "I've seen many faces in my life," he said. "Some people look perfect from far away, but when you get close, there's nothing there." Eliza blinked, unsure what he meant. He continued, "Kindness does not fade. Hard work does not fade. The way someone treats others when they think no one is watching, that matters." She felt her throat tighten. "You think you are only someone who can cook," he said gently. "But that's not what I see." Even the wind felt still. For the first time in years, Eliza did not feel invisible. She did not suddenly believe she was beautiful. She did not suddenly forget the whispers. But in that moment, she realized that at least one person was looking at her differently. Not through comparison, not through judgment, but with clear attention. And that small shift changed something inside her. Neither of them fully understood it yet, but the wall Thomas had built around his heart had developed a small crack, and the girl who believed she would always stand unnoticed in the kitchen had taken the first brave step towards something new. The evening ended quietly. No dramatic promises were made. No grand declarations were spoken. But as Thomas rode back toward his ranch under the fading light, and as Eliza closed the cafe door behind her, both carried the same unfamiliar feeling. For the first time in a long while, loneliness did not feel quite as heavy. Eliza replayed Thomas's words in her mind again and again. "That's not what I see." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. People had either ignored her feelings or tried to comfort her with polite phrases. But Thomas had sounded certain, almost protective, as if he truly believed what he was saying. The next morning she woke before sunrise as usual. The sky was still dark blue and the air felt cool against her skin. She tied her hair back and began preparing dough for bread. Her hands moved out of habit, but her thoughts were restless. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection in the small kitchen mirror differently. She did not suddenly see a beautiful face, but she did not see something shameful either. She saw a woman who worked hard, a woman who cared, a woman who had endured quiet judgments without turning bitter. That thought gave her a small but steady strength. When Thomas returned to the cafe 2 days later, the air between them felt different. Not uncomfortable, just aware. He removed his hat and gave her a small nod, but his eyes lingered slightly longer than before. She brought his usual stew without asking. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she replied softly. They both wanted to say more, yet neither rushed. Their connection had never been built on loud words. It grew in pauses and shared glances, in the way silence felt calm instead of awkward. Over the next few weeks, Thomas began staying longer after finishing his meals. Sometimes he helped stack chairs when the cafe was about to close. Other times he carried heavy flour sacks from the storage shed without being asked.
"You don't have to do that," Eliza told him once.
"I know," he replied simply. There was no pride in his tone, only quiet willingness. The town began whispering again, but this time the whispers carried curiosity instead of pity. Some people seemed surprised that Thomas Hale, the quiet rancher who kept to himself, was spending so much time at the cafe. One afternoon, an elderly farmer who had known Thomas for years sat beside him and said jokingly, "Never thought I'd see you sit still this long in one place." Thomas only smiled faintly. Good food is worth staying for. One evening after closing time, Thomas asked a question that surprised Eliza. "Have you ever seen the hills beyond the east pasture?" he asked. She shook her head. "I've never had much reason to leave town. There's a view from the top," he continued. "You can see the whole valley. It's quiet up there." She hesitated. She was not used to invitations. Her life had always been centered around the cafe. "I wouldn't want to disturb your work," she said carefully. "It wouldn't be a disturbance," he answered. A few days later, on a rare afternoon when the cafe closed early for repairs, Eliza found herself standing outside the ranch, feeling both nervous and curious. Thomas helped her onto his horse, steady and respectful. They rode slowly across open land, the wind brushing gently against her face. The fields stretched endlessly, golden under the sunlight. She had lived near them all her life, yet she had never truly seen them like this. When they reached the hilltop, Thomas stopped. The view took her breath away. The valley below looked peaceful, almost like a painting. Small houses dotted the landscape. The river shimmered in the distance. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He glanced at her, not at the valley. "Yes," he said quietly. He did not fully understand his tone, but she felt it. They sat there for a while, not speaking much. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of wind moving through tall grass. After some time, Thomas spoke again. "I used to come up here years ago," he said, "when I needed to think." She did not interrupt. "I thought I had my life planned," he continued. "But plans change." There was no bitterness in his voice, only honesty. Eliza understood more than he realized. She had once planned her own future too. Small dreams of marriage, of children laughing in a simple home. Over time, she had quietly folded those dreams away. Sometimes, she said gently, "We think we know what our life will look like, but maybe we only see part of it." Thomas looked at her carefully. "And what do you see now?" She paused, unsure how much courage she had. "I see that I was wrong about some things." He waited. "I thought I would always be alone," she admitted softly. His expression grew serious. "You shouldn't believe that." "Why?" she asked, almost challenging. "Because being alone is not something decided by appearance," he replied. "It's decided by whether two people can understand each other." Her heart beat faster at his words. The sun began to lower, painting the sky with soft colors. As they rode back toward the ranch, Eliza felt something she had not felt in years. Possibility. Over the next month, their connection deepened naturally. Thomas began inviting her to the ranch more often, sometimes to help prepare a meal, other times simply to sit on the porch and talk. He confessed that he had grown tired of eating alone. She admitted she had grown tired of pretending she did not want companionship. One evening, as she stood in his kitchen preparing bread, she looked around at the simple wooden shelves and plain table. "This house feels quiet," she said. "It does," he replied. "Too quiet?" He nodded slowly. She placed the dough down and wiped her hands. "A home should have warmth," she said thoughtfully. "Not just walls." Thomas stepped closer, not too near, but enough for his presence to feel steady. "That's what you bring," he said. She looked up at him, searching his face for doubt. There was none. You don't see yourself clearly, he continued. You think people judge you because of how you look. Maybe some do. But that says more about them than about you. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. No grand speech had ever meant so much. You've built something in that cafe, he added, not just a place to eat. A place where people feel welcome. That isn't small. For years, Eliza had measured her worth against beauty she did not have. Now, slowly, she began measuring it against the kindness she gave and the strength she carried. The town's whispers grew louder, but neither of them paid attention anymore. One evening, as stars filled the sky above the ranch, Thomas stood beside her on the porch. I don't want to sit at that table alone anymore, he said calmly. She felt her breath pause. I don't want you to think you are someone who will never be chosen, he continued, because I am choosing you. The words were simple, yet they carried certainty. Eliza felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from relief. For years she had believed she would only ever be tolerated, never truly wanted. And here stood a man who saw her fully, her quiet strength, her gentle heart, her hard-working hands, and valued them. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Eliza understood something life had been trying to teach her all along. Beauty fades in sunlight and shadows. Kindness does not. And sometimes, the person who feels unseen is simply waiting for someone who knows how to truly look. After Thomas told her, I am choosing you, the world did not suddenly explode into celebration. There were no loud cheers, no dramatic music, no grand gestures. Instead, there was something much deeper. Peace. Eliza stood on the porch of the ranch house, looking at him under the wide night sky. For years she had imagined what it might feel like if someone truly wanted her. She had expected excitement or disbelief, but what she felt instead was calm certainty, as if her heart had finally found the place it belonged. She did not answer him immediately. She wanted her words to be honest, not rushed. Don't want you to choose me because you feel lonely, she said softly. Thomas shook his head. I've been lonely for a long time, he admitted. But loneliness is not why I'm standing here. I'm here because when I think about my future, I see you in it. Her chest tightened gently at his words. You don't make noise, he continued. You don't try to impress anyone. But you make every place warmer just by being there. I don't want a grand life. I want a steady one. And I believe we could build that together. Eliza had spent so many years believing she would only be someone's last option, someone chosen out of kindness or convenience. But Thomas was not speaking out of pity. His eyes were steady, his voice did not shake. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen with certainty. I don't need a grand life either, she replied. I just want a home where I don't feel invisible. You won't, he said firmly. In the weeks that followed, they did not rush into anything dramatic. They spoke carefully about their expectations. They discussed simple things, daily routines, responsibilities, the cafe, the ranch. Both of them were practical people. They understood that real partnership required more than emotion. Thomas visited the cafe one afternoon and spoke to Eliza's aunt. He did not make long speeches. He simply said, I care for her, and I intend to treat her with respect. Her aunt studied him closely. She had watched Eliza struggle quietly for years. She had seen the way careless words affected her. She wanted to be certain this man understood her niece's heart. After a long pause, her aunt nodded slowly. She has always given more than she receives, she said. Make sure that changes. It will, Thomas replied. The town reacted just as small towns often do, with curiosity first, then acceptance. Some people were surprised. A few whispered that they never expected it. But many had quietly seen the way Thomas looked at her in the cafe, the way he listened when she spoke. Slowly, the whispers softened. Eliza continued working at the cafe for a while longer. She did not want to leave suddenly. Cooking had been her safe place for years, had carried her through loneliness. It had given her confidence when nothing else did. But now, something had shifted inside her. One afternoon, as she kneaded dough, she realized she was no longer cooking to prove her worth. She was cooking because she loved it. That difference felt powerful. Thomas began preparing a space for her at the ranch, not by changing everything, but by making room. He cleared shelves in the kitchen. He repaired a loose window frame. He planted a small garden near the house because she once mentioned she liked fresh herbs within reach. When Eliza first stepped into the ranch kitchen, knowing it would be hers too, she paused quietly. Sunlight entered through the window, touching the wooden table. It was still simple, still modest, but it no longer felt empty. She ran her hand gently over the table's surface. "This house feels different," she said. Thomas looked around. "How?" "It feels like it's waiting," she replied. He smiled slightly. Maybe it was. Their wedding was small and simple. No large decorations, no grand celebration, just close neighbors, a few friends, and family members gathered under the open sky near the ranch. The wind moved gently through the grass as they stood side by side. When Thomas spoke his vows, his voice was steady. He promised partnership, respect, and honesty. When Eliza spoke hers, her words were soft but clear. She promised loyalty, warmth, and shared strength. There were no dramatic tears, only quiet joy. After the ceremony, they shared a meal, one she had cooked with help from her aunt and a few neighbors. People praised the food as they always had, but this time, when they looked at her, their expressions were different. They no longer saw the poor girl who might remain alone. They saw a woman standing confidently beside her husband. Yet the most important change was not in the town's view. It was in her own. Married life at the ranch was not perfect or effortless. There were early mornings, long days, and moments of disagreement. Cattle still needed tending. Fences still broke during storms. Some days were exhausting. But at the end of each day, they sat together at the wooden table. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply ate in comfortable silence. The house was no longer too quiet. One evening, after a long day of work, Eliza caught her reflection in the kitchen window. The fading sunlight outlined her face. For a moment she saw herself the way she once had, plain, ordinary. But then she remembered something. Beauty had once felt like a door that was closed to her. Now she understood that she had been standing at the wrong door all along. Thomas walked into the kitchen and wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I used to believe no one would ever choose me. That was never true." "It felt true," she replied. He turned her slightly so she faced him. "The world talks too much about faces," he said. "But a face does not build a life. Character does. Kindness does." She felt warmth in her chest, not from his words alone, but from the years of quiet respect he had already shown. Seasons changed. The fields turned from gold to green and back again. The ranch grew stronger. So did their partnership. Eliza began inviting neighbors for small meals at the ranch. Laughter slowly filled the house. The kitchen, once silent, now carried warmth and conversation. Sometimes children of nearby families ran across the yard, their joyful noise echoing through the open windows. One afternoon, a young girl from town visited with her mother. The child stared at Eliza carefully and asked, "How did you become so lucky?" Eliza paused, surprised by the question. She knelt gently and said, "Luck is not always about how you look. Sometimes it's about being patient and staying kind." Later that evening, Eliza reflected on her own journey. She realized something important. Her life had not changed because she became more beautiful. It had changed because she stopped believing she was unworthy. Thomas had not rescued her. He had simply seen her clearly at a time when she could not see herself, and that made all the difference. Years later, when people in town spoke about them, they did not mention her appearance at all. They spoke about the welcoming ranch house, the meals that brought comfort, and the steady partnership between two people who understood each other. The girl who once believed she would remain unseen had become the heart of a home filled with warmth. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the sky stretched wide and endless above the fields, Eliza would sit beside Thomas on the porch. She would remember the day she said, "No one will marry an ugly girl, sir, but I can cook." And she would smile softly, knowing how wrong she had been about herself, because in the end, she was never just someone who could cook. She was someone who could love, endure, build, and grow. And that was far more beautiful than she had ever imagined.